Hello, everybody. Welcome to Pathways Podcast. I am your guest host,
Something.
Pastor Steve. I'm here with Aaron Groves. You all know Aaron. And Josh Britton is our guest today.
Hello.
Thanks, Josh, for coming in here. We thought maybe it'd be kind of fun to have you in here. You've been an attender at the Way for quite a while, but you're also a veteran. And
Yeah.
this is going to air right around Veterans Day. And so we thought that, we have Veterans Day coming up on Monday, and it's always so we as a church, I mean, myself being a veteran, kind of Coast Guard veteran, but we've
It
always
counts.
honored our veterans. I think it's really important. I think there's something about I've always felt that, and being a veteran is service, and service is a big part of who we are as Christians. And so I think it's a virtue that should be honored, and it's something that should be encouraged for people. And I know we've even had some of our young people that have, joined the military, and it's not without its challenges and dangers, but it's also reflects that heart of service and a willingness to put yourself in places that maybe others aren't. So it's good to talk about. And so I normally don't. I haven't done this for a while. Aaron has been.
Yeah.
So at some point, I'm going to expect you to kind of transition over,
Ask some questions.
ask the questions.
Ask some deep probing
So
questions.
you've been coming to the Way for how many years now? Quite a while.
Julie and I just talked about this. I started coming, I'm guessing 2010 or 11, somewhere around there. I think you probably invited me. But yeah, I actually had this conversation with one of the youth that he didn't recognize me, and I was like, well, there's a reason because I'm a back row, back corner, in and out kind of guy. I don't spend a lot of time, shaking hands, especially when everybody's around. But yeah, no, I've been coming for a long time since we were in the old church, and the growth, and I think you were fairly new when I started too, and
2010, I would have been.
Yeah.
So obviously, so part of your wife, Julie, was a Berkema, and so she predates before the Way. She grew up here as a kid when it was community reformed, but you started coming here before you two were an item, right? Or did you?
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
I started coming by myself. I was a deputy sheriff at the time. Aaron invited me, and I was kind of looking for, it was when you started the Peacekeepers Bible study,
Oh yeah.
and so then I was kind of looking for a church home at the time, and so I came, and it was one of your sermons that just like it was the first time that it was explained to me in that way, and it's like, oh, well, I'm supposed to be here. And so then Julie was our intern at the sheriff's office, and so she rode with me one day, and we just got talking, and somehow we started talking about church, and she said that she went to the Way, and I was like, oh, well, I go to the Way. and so I've told her before, but it kind of was like it piqued my interest quite a bit. So the church is kind of our first connection, and the rest is history, as they say.
Rest is history.
Yeah. So the moral of the story is, if you're single, you should start coming to church.
Absolutely.
You know what's interesting? We had Mark and Amanda Headington on not that long ago, and their whole thing got started with a ride along as well. So
Yeah,
I see a pattern here.
Yes, if you're single, go to church, be a cop, have a ride along.
Be in a car with Aaron Groves.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. No, that's good. So you're no longer at the sheriff's office. What are you doing now?
I'm no longer at the sheriff's office. I was there just shy of 9 years. I left 2017, technically. Julie and I started a CrossFit gym here in town, and that went extremely well, and we're loving every minute of it. It allowed me to kind of reconnect with people in a way and get that cop shell off. And
Because you weren't writing them tickets or taking them to jail.
right. It no longer became, when am I going to deal with you?
Yeah.
It became, how can I serve you and how can I help get you healthy? And so we were super blessed to do that for, 6 years almost. 6 years. But then, of course, in the time frame, COVID happened and the pandemic, we were shut down for 2 or 3 months. So it was nice for me. I was at home with the girls, getting to spend time with them. But we never really bounced back, I think, from that. In the meantime, Julie had some health issues that we had to really discuss and dive into. And so it became kind of a, well, what do you want to do versus need to do? And, waiting, because I don't think the gym would have supported the family if it came down to it. County Roads was hiring at the time. And so I went and got my CDL, got on at Jasper County Roads in 2020, part-time, and I did my first winter, and it was the first time that I'd seen a snowdrift taller than a motor grader. And so I was like, oh, well, this is kind of interesting, and really liked it, really liked the guys that I worked with. I've been able to climb up the ladder really quickly, and so now I'm the assistant maintenance superintendent. And so, I'm in charge of all the motor graders, all the trucks, a lot of the hands-on stuff that happens with the roads. I was not in charge of all the mud. That was God in the rain. But we are starting to get them fixed. And trying to come up with those solutions.
So much like a police officer, people either love you or hate you depending on their situation.
Yeah. Depending on when we show up, they either love us or hate us. And it's kind of interesting. I mean, just the dynamics of public service, and it's a lot of times just people don't understand, and when you explain it to them, then it's okay, so it makes sense. But
so here's a question about leadership, because obviously as you move up, you gain influence, and then you actually have employees that work underneath of you that you're responsible for. And what was the most challenging part of going into a leadership role where you now had to lead people? Because I think for people that haven't been in a leadership position, they don't understand, like, it's pretty easy to motivate yourself when you got that's all you're worrying about, right? You're in charge of yourself, that's it. But then when you start becoming in charge of people, things change.
It's one of those things where I've always kind of found myself in a leadership role of some sort within whatever I've been doing, whether in the military or at the sheriff's office. I got to do some leadership stuff out there, and then at the gym I had employees, and that's where it first kind of started. Where it's like it's super scary to have somebody represent you when you're not there, and you just hope that you found a good person, and that they will treat people as you would, or that you would hope that would
stick to the mission,
and vision, and so at County Roads, I kind of, I skipped a lot of steps in a lot of years of service. A lot of the guys that I have underneath me, they do have, 15, 20 years of experience within the road systems. And so I lean heavily on those guys, whether they know it or not. I'll bounce ideas off of them. Hey, what do we think we should do? Or, but then, so leading them it was pretty scary at first, just because I didn't know how they were going to take me as far as still being the newbie, and now I'm in charge. But I've done several other things to kind of gain my leadership skills, and I lean heavily on them, but on the same hand, it's still trying to learn who they are, trying to figure out their best skills and how to utilize those the best, whether it be building a road from scratch, or maybe I've got some really good snow pushers, and so I lean heavily on them to kind of train the new guys as they come in, and hey, what can we do differently to help them succeed?
Yeah.
So that's been kind of a big thing, is just kind of leaning on people. And I'm a big proponent of, leadership is service, and you're really there to help them succeed. And I do the things that they can't, because they are out in a motor grader, they're out in a truck, and if they need certain items, I can run it to them, or or I can answer the phone and talk to people that have questions. So
Yeah, that's good.
It's interesting. So I remember when I was in the Coast Guard, we actually had training because the military style leadership was shifting, and it was shifting from an authoritarian style leadership where essentially you take the presupposition that people will mess up, and your job is to keep them from messing up. But what they were really saying is people want to be successful and they want to do a good job, and your job as a leader is to help them. And so it was a complete shift in mindset. And I remember some of the old guard were just like, "This is ridiculous," and blah 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 blah. And it's like, it really does make a huge difference. I mean, if you take that approach that your job as a leader is to not necessarily make their job easier, but in some sense make their job easier, but help them succeed, be successful. Then people pretty quickly change their view of you too as a leader, I think, and once they understand that that's your goal.
Yeah, and I think part of my part of that is treating people as adults,
Right.
and having them understand that if you mess up, I'm not going to yell and scream at you.
Right.
We'll have an actual conversation.
It may be even my fault,
Right,
if I didn't give you what you needed to make the right decision.
right.
So
So
there's a humility in it.
yeah, I think it's coming to the table with a conversation, and hey, how do we remedy this, and how do we not have it happen again? But yeah, there's no yelling and screaming, and I think that's when people shut down, and and you're not going to get anywhere anyways. So
Yeah.
Would you say that was a leadership style that you were taught beginning in the military? What was your highest rank that you achieved in the military?
So when I got out, I was a staff sergeant, so I was E6. So I was in charge of a squad, and had 4 or 5 guys underneath me, and I absolutely remember basic training, and then having the leadership that would do the yelling and screaming, and just waiting, like you said, to mess up. And every time I got yelled at, it's like, this is not making it any better.
Right.
I'm like, I'll do what you're saying because I respect your rank, and I understand that I messed up, but like, this is not helping. Even back to like high school wrestling or football or whatever it may be. Yelling in a motivational way is yeah, sure, I'll get pumped up for that, but as soon as you start yelling or screaming because I had a false start, and like that, well, that was a mistake. It's not gonna help anything. So, but yeah, I mean, in the military, I tried to be more of a guidance and to the younger guys coming in, especially. I did I have 2 tours in Iraq, and so the guys that were just coming in and they knew they were going, but I could kind of give my experience and kind of mentorship in a way that what they're going to come into and what to expect, and kind of guide them on the way.
Sometimes in the military, I think that in basic training too, they try to put you under a degree of stress because they're trying to see what you would do. But you're right. There is a point where it's like, what are you trying to achieve? Because if you put people under high amounts of stress and it's really unnecessary, then what happens when they're really under stress? And then you just added to what is already there. And so I think that was kind of the piece that so basically the approach that they landed on is when you are in a high stress situation and there are lives at risk, as a leader, you may have to take an authoritarian stance where you get down, go over there, no time for discussion, just do what I tell you to do. But then there's the time afterwards where you process, you talk about it, and there's everything in between. And so it's a fascinating leadership style. You mentioned 2020, and it was it was just kind of interesting too, because it seemed like it seemed like so many people were taking this authoritarian style. And I remember here at the Way, we'd have talk as a staff, and it's like, maybe we ought to just treat everybody like adults. I mean, I know it's crazy, but let's just let them make their own decisions. And it's just kind of, it's interesting to hear you say that, because I just wholeheartedly agree with what you said. So,
Well, yeah, like, when we came back from our lockdown, gyms and fitness areas were restricted to so much, and we made the decision. There's only so much that you can do, and they're adults. They can make their own decision. If they want to come, they can come. If not, then so be it. We'll try to meet them in the middle somewhere. But so yeah,
the crazy thing is, now we know that physical activity and exercise was probably one of the best things you could have been doing. And then, I mean, I don't want to go down that path, but it just is so, my son Logan graduated from Iowa State with a kinesiology degree, and he came out in 2020 and he couldn't get a job anywhere. And it's just ironic, because the very thing that seemed to have been the natural answer to what we were experiencing was all shut down and basically told, well, you guys can't.
Yeah, and for us, I mean, we had talked to a lot of people when we came back, and it's the same with everything else, where they lost that community, they lost the social aspect of everything and getting out of the house, and so then you almost had to start over with building relationships again, and then on the same hand, you're like, oh well, I didn't talk to you the whole time that we were locked down, so I guess you don't need to be in my life or whatever. And so yeah, it was an interesting time, and yeah, but like I said, I mean, I lucked out, and the girls were 4-1, 3-1. So for me, I was a stay-home dad, and we got to play and have fun. And I mean, I cheated and brought them into the gym. They learned to ride bikes in the gym with nobody there, and it was a good time for me. So
yeah,
I was doing online school with my kids. It was horrible.
Yeah,
It was trying to get them to stay, because they were given homework, and then we had to sit with them and help them. I'm like, oh my goodness, I can.
Yeah, I don't
How do
envy you.
teachers do it?
the crazy thing for me, since our kids were out and were grown, Vicky and I's life changed very little. She had to start wearing a mask to work every day, but as far as I was concerned, my life really didn't change at all. We just came into the church, and
Except you preached to an empty empty worship
for
center.
a couple months.
Yeah,
But then after that, it was.
game on.
But yeah, no, it's kind of a interesting thought. So let's talk about your faith journey. You mentioned coming in here, kind of describe your journey of faith. And what I like. So here's why I like to hear from guys like you. Okay, because you're not a guy necessarily. I think if people ask you, you'd be more than happy to tell them. But you're not a guy that necessarily puts all your cards on the table right away. And so people could very easily not know how you feel about things, simply because it's just your nature not to. But talk about your walk of faith and what it means to you, and how you've progressed through the years and where you're at today.
So, I kind of get the typical, had a really good childhood. My parents were divorced, but we did the back and forth. But we grew up in a church home, and, went to church every Sunday. We knew, we were going to color through the first little bit, but then once we got done with the hymns and stuff, then we would go to church, or the children's church, and be dismissed for that. And, a regular basis, knew who God was, knew the Bible stories and everything. And then, went through middle school, high school, got baptized in in Colfax, over there at 13 or 14, kind of 8th grade sort of thing. But I don't think I really knew what I was doing at the time. I was kind of just going through the motions and checking the boxes and sort of thing, playing church, so to speak. High school, I caught on fire. What would be now my brother-in-law was my youth pastor at the time, and so that was kind of my first, I think, adult male role model as being on fire, for the Lord, and so was super on fire. But on the same hand, still playing church. I would do the youth groups. I would do Sunday church and everything, but in the meantime, discovered alcohol and of course sex and the works. And so after high school, actually during high school, I enlisted in the reserves. So
What prompted you to do that?
so I had a friend. His name's Brady Lewis. If he's listening, thank you. But no, he came up to me and he wanted to join on the buddy program. So he and I would join with the thought that we were going to be buddies throughout the program, and we would be together. We'd know each other. So I was like, yeah, that sounds good. So I joined, and I think it might have been like a month after I signed all my paperwork and everything, and he actually came up to me and said he was getting kicked out because he had asthma, and he's never had asthma in a day in his life, and still doesn't. But the Army, for whatever, kicked him out. So I was like, oh, well, that's convenient. So
There goes my
So
wingman.
much for the buddy program.
yeah, so I was on my own, and which was okay, but. I joined when I was 17. I was within a window. I could do it myself without my parents. So I came home and told Mom I figured out how to pay for college, and told her I'd joined the Army. I didn't see her for the next 4 hours. She was crying in her bedroom. Came up and we talked about it. I had two grandpas that both served, and one in World War II, the other in Korea, and then it skipped a generation. But then, I left for basic training, and I think during basic training, I went to church, I think 3 times, but that was more or less because we were allowed to. But I remember, having a Gideon Bible and then camouflage Bibles, and it was super cool, and reading a little bit, and getting verses out of there for tattoo themes or something like that. And then I went overseas a couple times after my whole career. I'm one of those reservists that I actually have more active duty time than I do reserve time. I saw God work, but I didn't give him any credit. I don't remember attending one church service overseas or anything. I think we did some prayers every now and again if we felt like the mission was kind of sketchy, or we had that feeling,
So let's talk about that a little bit. Just a couple different things. One, what unit were you with, and what was your guys' main role or mission?
Yeah, so my first tour was with the 372nd Engineer Group, which was out of Des Moines, and part of their mission was to be the headquarters type unit, basically administration for several other engineering battalions.
Okay.
That tour we had, I think, 3 or 4 different bridge battalions underneath of us, and then several different combat engineer battalions, which the Bridgers bridge, and then the combat engineers. I was a combat engineer that tour, and so I say we build it up and blow it up. So everything from quick construction, from obstacles to buildings, and then we can do explosives and everything as well. And then we had anything from underwater bridge divers to the works. And so that tour, I was assigned as our group commander. He's a full bird colonel, as his security detail. So wherever he went, I went. Was in his back pocket, and he was absolutely phenomenal. To work underneath of. He never treated me like anything else other than a person. So that was really nice. So I drove him. Like I said, anywhere he went, I went, and that was kind of my tour. So I got to see a lot. I got to do a lot. And on the same hand, we also did bridge inspections. My first tour was the end of 2003 until the early 2005. And so shortly after, the whole invasion had already taken place. So now it was kind of the rebuild phase. So we were looking at main artery bridges of highways and what needs to be fixed on them. What can we do to start infrastructure again and that sort of thing. So yeah, I got to travel a lot and I got to see a lot.
And that was Iraq?
That was, Iraq. My first tour, Al-Assad, Iraq, or Balad, Iraq, and that was Al-Assad was the official Air Academy, the Air Force Academy for the Iraqi Air Force. So, yeah, when we got there, I remember, there were planes and jets and things that were blown up or just distraught because they were either pushed off the runways or destroyed or whatever. But then it was the Air Force Academy for Saddam's Air Force.
So you were deployed for over a year.
Yeah, my first tour was just shy of 14 months.
Okay, so I think it's important for people to know that don't have a clue about deployment and how the military works. Like, you're gone. Like maybe if you have a kid or you have some sort of extenuating circumstances, you get leave to come home, right? But otherwise, you think about it, like people are leaving their families, they're leaving their spouses for a year. Yeah,
and it's kind of interesting where that has, like, how that's progressed through military history. I just watched a deal with the Sergeant Major of the Army. He is in an interview about being a veteran. I think is what the gist of it was. But he was talking about he has seen combat. He has seen countless hours of combat, but he's never been to war. And his premise was, if like for me, even like looking at his conversation, no, I've never been to war. I've never had to
storm the beach in
Normandy. I've never had to fight in the trenches. I've never had to, do any Battle of the Bulge, any of those battles. And so, actually, when I got home from my first tour, my grandpa on my mom's side, he was a World War II vet, and that was, of course, the first time that he opened up about some of what he saw, what he did, and I remember talking on Skype or video chatting with him while I was overseas, and he was just floored that was now a thing because World War II, they're writing letters, and then they're getting censored within those letters. They would go through the mail system in the military, and then they would black out whatever would be operational security. And so then my grandma would take weeks to get from him to her and vice versa, so that's always backlogged of what's going on. And but then even then you wouldn't get the full letter because a lot of times it was blacked out. So here we are now in 2000s where we have internet access, we have email, we have
FaceTime,
we have phones, and so you when you pick up and you go on a deployment overseas, especially into a combat theater, for me, time kind of stopped at home because there's a cutoff, and you try not to think about it. But then when you come home, you're like, oh well, this is where this conversation left with this person, so we're gonna go have this conversation. Well, they're completely, they're a year older. You're a completely different person based off of what you've seen or done.
Do they give you any kind of do they give you any kind of training on reemerging back into the civilian?
I don't know that if they do it now.
Did they for you guys? They didn't.
No. So
they just bring you back and drop you off.
Yeah. So we came back. My first tour deployed through Fort Riley, Kansas. And so it was in the middle of Kansas, which is not, anything to get excited about. Yeah. But, no, we came home and, we were in Fort Riley for maybe a week or so, just doing the debrief, medical checks, everything like that. And then, we came home on a bus, and then we had a quick, welcome home ceremony. The next day, I think we did like some awards or something like that, and then we were sent home. And there was nothing really talked about, how to reintegrate. And that was kind of the interesting thing where, like, talking to other guys, other veterans, and within the VA system, or just hearing stories. Vietnam and Iraq have so many similarities with that, because you're in a war zone one day and the next day you're at home. Whereas like World War I, World War II, Korea, they had an entire month ship ride back stateside, where they would be able to decompress with other guys. They'd be able to talk about what they had experienced, and kind of have that moment where they can go from the combat stress situation to, okay, well, now we're home.
Yeah. What would you say was the biggest challenge coming back? Was it, I hear stories about, troops coming back, and they go back into the civilian world and work a job where they've been in charge of millions of dollars worth of equipment. They've been in charge of people's lives, and now, they're getting a job where they've got somebody who's never lived life, ordering them around, and they struggle with that. Its purpose, or is it trauma related? Is it the combat stress? What was the biggest challenge for you?
I think for me, I left when I was 19. I came home when I was 21. Just the way that, kind of handed out or landed within my age range. And so, part of my experience overseas, certainly made me grow up quite a bit. And you certainly see life in a different aspect. I think that you start to cherish life differently, and especially family, and holding things close, because you just don't really know what the next hour has in store. And so when I came home, family was super important, and even my siblings, well, they were always too busy, or whatever it may be, to get together or something. And it's like, all right, well, I'll just come see you. In that understanding, but I can remember, vividly, I came home and I went to Iowa State for a semester, somewhere in there. No, I went on my second deployment, and then I came home and did Iowa State. And I sat down next. I was 23, 24. I sat down next to, freshly out of high school, 18-year-old. He was crying because his girlfriend just broke up with him, and like, hey, buck up. There's bigger things out there. There's and he told me to get bent, and I was like, all right, I'm done. Like, this is different.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think for a lot of guys, it's just that transition. My first deployment, when I came home on leave, I remember being on an airplane, a C-130 leaving, and at the same time as a rocket or a mortar attack. And so it was literally like, you're being attacked 24 hours earlier, and then here I am, middle of Iowa, and of course it was 4th of July weekend, and so it was like, oh, well, apparently fireworks and I don't get along anymore. So yeah, and I think that's where a lot of it is just, there's no time to decompress, and it is hard to make that transitions a lot.
I think there's times where you're in situations where once you see something, you can never unsee it. And unless somebody has also seen it, they can't imagine it.
Yeah.
And so I always so I know it's not combat. I was never in combat, but when I was active duty, and the thing about the Coast Guard is they have an ongoing mission. So we would go on deployments where we go get underway on our ship, and we go do things. And I'd be gone for months at a time. And I was married, and I had a baby, and it was a really hard transition back. and then maybe we'd be back for like we'd be gone for 2 months, and then maybe I'd be home for a few weeks, and it's very awkward. It's and then, that goes on for over a year. I couldn't imagine being married, being away from your wife for 14 months, and then coming back home. I mean, you talk about a little bit of awkwardness, kind of trying to reconnect, and she's been doing her thing, or your spouse has been living their life without you, and then you come back, and that's why marriage is so hard in the military.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting because so I just recently got actually diagnosed with PTSD, knowing that I've had it for a long time, but then just kind of biting the bullet kind of and going and seeing and so getting therapy and everything, and but I've also been reading a lot of books and veterans and PTSD, and they talk about that very thing of being married and coming home and having a completely different spouse almost, and having to relearn each other, having to date again, and having to figure out, is this what we actually want again? Yeah. But then the same thing, guys with kids is, they either never seen their kid before, and then all of a sudden they have a 1-year-old or missing a graduation, a high school graduation, and that that's a big deal, and so then having to kind of repair those relationships as well.
I would come home from being underway, and Alexis would just bawl because she didn't know who I was.
Mm-hmm.
And it was quite it's.
I talked to a Colonel Jason Edwards. He was with the Iowa Army National Guard, and I was talking to him about that. Like, what do you do like when you're on deployment? And he's like, the guys, I encourage them to weekly, minimal, call home, have conversations, try to stay connected with their spouse as much as they can while on deployment, because you don't want to come home and not know your spouse anymore. And so thankfully technology exists where, they can FaceTime, they can Skype, or, make a phone call on a weekly basis and try to stay connected.
Yeah, I think, but on that, you stay connected, but I think there's a difference between going through life together versus going through life separately. And
we kind of learned that in 2020 too.
Absolutely. And you can have a conversation on the phone, you can have a FaceTime conversation, but you're going to be comparative where whose life is either worse or whose life is better at the time.
Right.
I had relationships that fell apart based off of, they were going through school. My friend group was going through school and stuff at the time, and having conversations, finals is so rough, and it's like, you have no idea. Like, I just watched a truck get blown up and is 3 foot in the air. Like, and so, I think that's kind of the hard part is not comparing your life to somebody else's and be like, oh, well, my life is so much more worse, or my life is so much better right now. And that's, I think, the hard part of reconnecting is trying to figure out, even that I have a phone call, trying to be present within that person's life, and having having it be like you're there still, but you're not.
Well, you're not. And they've done studies where they've actually, been able to look at the brain while they have phone conversation over a video versus a face-to-face conversation, and there's different parts of the brain that light up in face-to-face conversation. There's more of a connection.
I think it's interesting too. The thing about being in the military also is that there's an element, your life is not your own, and it never is. You're always at the mercy of. It's interesting too. I do think you get that, like when you're in a paramilitary like police, you never know when you're going to get that call in the middle of the night, and your job is to respond to that, and there's always that element in it, and I think that so other than just being in a service, literally being in a service is a good thing about being in the military, but I think it's also being in that place. Somebody said one time, to truly understand the value of freedom, you have to lose it, and I think there's something about. In the military, you kind of lose your freedom. It doesn't feel like that at the time, but you're aware that you're at the mercy of the government. If the government says do this or do that, and you're always kind of aware that you could get in trouble, they always used to joke that, if you get sunburnt, you're damaging military property and things like that. And you can actually get in trouble if you damage yourself, military property.
Yeah, tattoos and everything.
Yeah, all that stuff. You're at the mercy of all of that stuff. And there's just something about understanding what true freedom is, and you're willing to fight for it because you know what it's like to not have it. But it's just... Yeah. It's just something. Unless you're there, it's hard to imagine.
Well, GI Joe is a government issue Joe, and so you do lose that, and you lose your identity a little bit, and then of course
form a new one.
Form a new one, yeah. and then a lot of times you form a new one within that, and but then you're trying to keep relationships, and people grow and change, and so. Yeah, I mean it's kind of in 2 Timothy that greater love that hath no man than to lay down his life for another, and there's a lot of people that will never know what it's actually like to look somebody in the eye and say I'll die for you, and if you don't know you don't know sort of thing, but and I say same thing with police officers, first responders, firefighters, and if when you get caught in that world and then you come up to somebody that it's all about me,
right?
It's like, well, I don't know that we can be friends, but
I totally agree, and that's the way I look at even the Apostle Paul. You're right. He talks about being a soldier versus being a civilian, and he talks about the contrast. So life as a Christian is more like being a soldier than it is being a civilian, because the problem with being a civilian is you never have a cause bigger than yourself.
Right. Yeah, and to kind of come full circle, kind of back to my faith journey here. I lost God, quite a bit, and was super lost. And
during your military time?
During my military time, when I came home, was super lost. Even when I came to the sheriff's office, I was struggling and wasn't ready to admit it yet, and so coming to church, is again kind of checking off the boxes, and now throughout my adult life, I've had kids and I've I've been able to get plugged back in, and so I started coming to Operation Finding Freedom, and I told the guys, I said, I remember when we're trying to start it. And, I didn't want any part of it because, well, no offense, because you don't know.
Yeah.
And, so I was skeptical of it. And so when I sat down with, I think there were 4 guys there that night, including me, it was automatically like they've lived my life, and they like their story is my story.
Yeah.
And, even if it's Vietnam, Korea, whatever it may be, like they know what I've dealt with and what I've done, and I don't have to kind of put that, I don't have to put that face mask on of I don't have to pretend that I didn't do these things, or I don't have to be judged or something like that.
Yeah.
And so that's helped me get back tremendously, getting in with those guys, and then of course small groups, and just diving into the word now.
Let me ask you this: when you were living that time period, maybe it's post-military, it's sheriff's office time, but like when you weren't following Christ or living out your faith, what were you going through? How were you dealing with the struggles?
I found the bottom of a lot of bottles. Full-fledged alcoholism.
Tell me what did the alcohol, was it just an escape? Like you didn't, obviously alcohol lowers inhibition, things like that. Was it like, it helped you forget just for a moment?
I think it helped me forget a lot.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I've struggled with coming home is large crowds, and really just kind of people in general, as far as if I don't know them, or If I get into a group, really, if I get into a room with people, I don't do well with people floating behind my back or like consistently am thinking that something is going to happen. And that alcohol for me was a Band-Aid, so that I could drink enough and then everybody disappeared, and once I figured that out, that it was the kind of the calming effect, I dove right in, and it was bring as many people as I could with me, whether it be other guys that I knew or was living with, or friend groups and everything. I mean, like, I tell people I went to Iowa State, but I just drank a lot at Iowa State. I didn't go to classes or anything like that. And looking back, I feel bad for the people that were hanging out with me, because they were students and they were there for an education. And I'm like, hey, it's Tuesday afternoon, let's have a drink. And so yeah, I mean, I self-medicated a lot, and
You always woke up the next day.
always woke up.
Nothing
Yep.
changed.
Nothing's changed. Everything was the same, and constantly lived with that. It was, I would wake up and there was a time where I would wake up, start drinking again, and and I lucked out. We come back full circle, and Brady Lewis called me one day and said, "Hey, the Jasper County Sheriff's Office is hiring, and I think you should put in for it." And I was like, well, that's interesting. I mean, I was full-fledged drinking, driving. I mean, it was not pretty. And there's no way that I could be a police officer. By the grace of God, it happened to be during wrestling season. I was helping out a wrestling team at the time, and so I was in somewhat shape, and so I passed PT, and I could put on enough of a facade, anyways, that nobody saw it. It was enough of a
You're
closet.
functional.
Yeah. And so I got hired, and it was either get hired by the sheriff's office or go on what would be my third deployment, and that would have been to Afghanistan. So I was like, well, this is happening for a reason. So I tried to, clean up my act, and I was like, I'm gonna not drink as much anymore. Well, then of course, the sheriff's office, the law enforcement has its own problems in its own world, and so alcohol and I found each other real quick again, and it was all constantly trying to fill it. It was the same things though. I mean, if I look at it, it was still, we were going to bars, or we were going to be in a crowd, and I needed to have that calm. Otherwise it was gonna start freaking out. And that's where, like, talking to people who've done like Journey, and have like, where has God like worked in your life? And it's like, it is always there. And like, having Brady called me about the sheriff's office, got me out of a little bit of a hole. But then at the sheriff's office, I met my eventual wife, and I met some really great people, and I got back into church, and then have started over again, and it's like only by God's grace, and do I don't do it. The PTSD thing has kind of really reared its face, I guess, lately. My anxiety and everything, and so I had a little bit of an anxiety attack at the Alpha retreat. Julie and I left early, and I whatever was going on, and so I had to leave, and so then actually went to the emergency room, checked out fine. Felt like I was having a heart attack, but they said I do have a heart, but it works, and it's okay. So.
Just 3 times.
Yeah, it's just
small.
It just needs to grow. But then, like, I've been back in the Word, and I've been back into reading my Bible, and it's kind of the Holy Spirit works, and it was when I started getting back in and getting plugged in, it was the parable of the three the seeds, and like my heart has been so hard for a long time, and God slowly started to break it down and to make it good soil. And so Alpha retreat happened, and so then the next day, devotional was asking for help, and it's okay to do that. And so I put a prayer request in, and then of course you text me afterwards, and it's just it just that weight it gets lifted, and it's like I've got somebody in my corner, and it's just like out of everything that I've done, I've turned my back so many times, but then there's so many different areas that God did work. It's like I don't deserve this. I don't, but He loves you anyways. Yeah. And so that's been a lot like where I am at now, like as far as faith journey is just, understanding that I am worthy, and no matter what I've did in the past, and kind of the reborn sort of thing. So, and so it's been a journey.
So what would you say to someone who's maybe where you were at, right? Finding the bottle, maybe even just shutting down. They don't talk to anybody. They're not in community with anybody or anything. What advice would you give them?
Well, I think it's hard because a lot of times you don't want help unless you want help. And if somebody doesn't want help and they're not willing to do that, then I think it's a tough place. But then on the same hand, it's the small things of inviting them to hang out, or trying to break the mold of hey, we can have a good time without alcohol, or we can have a good time doing a mini golf or something like that, and just kind of meeting them in the middle sort of thing. And then for me really it was finding where I belong again. And a lot of times through the military you do things that absolutely stink, but you're doing them with other people, and you build that bond. And so I think that's where Operation Finding Freedom, that bond was instantly there. And it's like I can relax a little bit, and that's where it's like Kirk and Ted and the guys have the ability to grow and to have close conversations, but then also on the same hand, I've just found where I've kind of fit in, and then that kind of branches into other people, other friends, other meeting people, and like I said, I've been coming to church for 12 years or better, 14 years, I guess, and I've never tried to reach out to people and know them or but then now it's like,
it's interesting you talk about Operation Finding Freedom. I don't know if I've ever talked about the evolution. I don't even know if I've told when you first brought it up, we might have talked about it, but I had somebody who was going to church here that was a veteran, and they were in a combat. I don't know, they were Afghanistan or Iraq. I can't remember, but they had some people in their unit that they served with that had committed suicide. And they just said to me, they're like, the church needs to do something. And I'm like, well, that you're right. What can we do? And I said, would you want to? And they didn't want to do lead anything or do anything. And so I can remember looking for Bible studies for combat veterans. And at the time, there wasn't really anything. We were thinking about discipleship. I think I might have talked to Marcy about it, and it's like, well, what can we do? And then I think you just kind of out of the blue, somewhere in that process, you start praying about something, and then you kind of came up with this idea that, I just feel like I have a calling to minister to veterans.
Yeah.
And I was just like, Okay. And that was, I mean, we'd already been down the road of Discover Hope. And so that was an answer to prayer. But the seeds of that was planted by veterans who, you know, they made it home, but they didn't make it.
Yeah, and one of the books that I'm in my travels for work, I spend a lot of like windshield time in my pickup. So Julie, of course, introduced me to books on tape, and well, it's not on tape, but
Right.
audio books.
Right.
And so one of the books that I've been reading now is about a group of soldiers that were all involved in one specific attack, and but now the story is kind of each one's individual journey afterwards, and dealing with PTSD or the suicide, and yeah, I think it's just where you get lost and you try to find where you don't have those images, like you said,
Right.
you can't see what you can't unsee what you've seen, and for a lot of guys, there's just they just feel hopeless, and so back to what would you suggest, and man, getting plugged in in some way, shape, or form. No matter what it is.
You don't even have to say any, like Operation Fighting Freedom, you don't have to say anything.
No.
You can just come, hang out. And, the verse it was founded on felt like the Lord laid on my heart of just, I think it's 2 Corinthians 3:17, for the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit is, there's freedom. And the whole point is to create a space where people can find freedom. And, we watched Nelson Hoskins, one of our, he was
The legend.
Yeah, a Navy veteran, and I remember one group meeting we had in there, like he just started opening up about something he's never talked about, and he found freedom. Like for the first time in a while, like we gathered around and prayed for him, and like it was just like a weight was lifted off of his shoulders because he'd been carrying that pain and that image and everything alone for so long.
Sorry, you go ahead.
I think part of that weight, especially as a combat vet, you're asked or you're put in situations to do things that humans shouldn't be doing.
Yeah.
And so you come home and you feel like a monster in a lot of different ways.
Unfit for society, maybe.
Unfit for society. We go back into relationships. Will my wife love me after the things that I've done? And that's kind of been part of my journey too, is semi opening up to Julia. She's always kind of known I've been fidgety in crowds, but I've never flat out told her anything. But then like opening up to her, there's still plenty that I've never told her, but opening up and it's a big sigh of relief because I didn't want to tell her because I was afraid of what she would think of what I've done or and everything, but just hearing her say I love you, still, but then you go back to being worthy of Jesus, and there's nothing that you could do to that would make him not love you, and so that, like I said, like having that weight where it's like, man, like you love me still, like no matter like all the stuff that I've done. So
and I sit there and I look at it and I'm like, obviously I'm a pastor, there's a spiritual component to this. And you think about, the enemy to God sidelining some of our strongest people. And, it's, you want them to find that freedom because you really want them to get in the game.
Yeah.
If they can find the freedom to get in the game, they have a lot to bring. And, obviously there's a timeline here that is not within our control oftentimes, but at the same time, I just see so many amazing people that they are that they're very strong, that they have so much to give. They have amazing hearts, but they're sidelined because there's like a spiritual component. It's like Satan. You think you're getting somewhere, and all of a sudden there he is to say, "Hey, you haven't forgotten about this. We haven't forgotten about this, and God hasn't forgotten about this." And it is a hard thing. And I really think if it's a spiritual battle, it requires spiritual weapons to overcome it.
Yeah, we go back to your sermon on the armor of God, and there's so much truth to that. Getting ready to go on a mission, and in the middle of Baghdad, Iraq, or in the middle of a war zone, and you spend so much time checking your gear, checking your armor, checking everything to make sure that it's fit right. But you're going to battle, and and we just talked about it at Alpha Sunday. That that is a conscious decision of putting on the armor of God every day, because every day you're going to war with social media, you're going to war with politics, you're going to war with just people on a bad day, and you have to be able to equip yourself with that armor to protect yourself and to know that God is on your side.
Yeah, and that your enemy is not flesh and blood.
Oh, for sure.
Right? Spiritual. Yeah, I would suggest anyone listening, like if you're someone that's in that place where maybe you're coping with PTSD or struggling with things that you've done in your past, that reach out to us. Let us know how we can help you, if we can get you plugged into Operation Finding Freedom. I'm sure you'd be available for a phone call for any veteran that's,
oh yeah, for sure,
that's struggling. There's no shame either in counseling, like professional counseling. I think, one of the last things I did before I left the sheriff's office was plant the seed about therapy and counseling for the office, because law enforcement was kind of years behind the military.
Mm-hmm.
They would always take care of your body, be prepared for the fight, be ready for the fight, always be, strong and ready, but they neglected the mind.
Right.
And they, especially in the special operations community, they were really starting to treat the mind, and law enforcement was just so far behind. And so they're getting caught up, and but the stigma is being broken that, like, therapy and counseling, it's okay.
Right.
You're not weak because of it. In fact, you'll be stronger because of it.
That's one of the ironies about, we as guys think if we bare our souls to our wives, they're going to think we're weak.
Yeah.
And all they do is interpret that. They love us even more after we do that. I mean, it's because what's weird is they know there's something wrong with us.
Yeah.
And when we start to open up and be vulnerable to them and say, you know what, this is kind of what I'm thinking, this is what I'm going through, they don't like, oh, suck it up, you're weak.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I love you, and and it's just completely the opposite. And and I think that to some degree we kind of think that about others too. It's
men have a hard time opening up to other men and getting on an emotional level with them, because we've always been told it's weakness, right? So we don't let down those emotional guards. We don't get vulnerable, and we just suck it up, buttercup, and deal with it. And eventually it manifests itself in unhealthy ways.
We have a saying around the way that it's okay to not be okay, but it's not okay to want to stay that way.
Mm-hmm.
So the one thing of it is, the thing that's difficult is if somebody is talking about what they're struggling with, but they don't really want to resolve it. And I know it takes time, and there's got to be patience and all those things. But the idea is that you part of identifying this is what I'm struggling with. There also has to be an acknowledgement that I want to get freedom from this. I want to overtake this. I want to beat this. And it's like, okay, let us help you. If you just want to wallow in misery, it's hard. It's hard. There has to be something inside of you that says, I need to beat this. I need to gain victory over this.
It's like what he said earlier. I gotta want the help, or I gotta want to be okay.
Yeah.
So.
Exactly.
And a lot of times I think, in veterans, in combat veterans, if they've lost a buddy or they've lost a person that they know, or there's that guilt,
Survivor's guilt.
Where I'm home, or this person's not, or going to veterans services or the VA, and I walk in and there's a guy my age with no legs, and it's like, oh, I know what happened to you, but here I am, and I'm walking around, and you get that sense that you don't want to leave your buddy behind, but on the same hand is you're not doing any justice for that person by wallowing in shame, and you can raise them up at the same time of talking about them, and exploring what it is about that person, whether you were too ashamed or too scared to tell that person that you loved them,
Yeah.
and so it's interesting. I think that a lot of times we just get stuck in our own heads that we're more happy where we're at because that's how I should feel because of whatever reason. And so yeah, you got to want the help. You got to understand that there are people out there to help. And man, it's the Holy Spirit. Like I said, I mean, like I opened up my Bible for the first time in a long time, and I've never really been good about reading the Bible. Like even at when I've been really on fire for God, and but then like now, like opening up like just like a random page, and then of course it talks about anxiety and getting help, and it's like I don't know how you can argue with that, and so yeah.
How many times does Jesus say, be at peace or have no fear? That God knows. God knows that we are scared sheep. I mean, it just life. It makes us anxious. It makes us. There's a lot to worry about. There's a lot of suffering in life, and that's such a huge part of the gospel itself too.
Yeah.
I find, here I am a pastor, and my job is to read the Bible. If I don't get to it in the morning, it's like cognitively, my brain is clearest first thing in the morning. I can read it later in the day, but sometimes other thoughts, like if you're sitting there, you ever been reading scripture and like another thought comes in there, and the next thing you know, you're on the next page. You don't even know what you just read. And so,
or a kid comes in.
Yeah. I find that if I get to that quiet time in the morning, that's when I have the most cognitive recall, and just my mind is the clearest. But everybody's different.
Yeah, I think but for me, it's doing devotionals and comparing devotional verses to then studying, and there's so many times where what for me, especially lately, I mean, there's so many times where whatever verse you read for the day, that morning, somehow that's going to come into play during the day, and it's like, oh well, here we go,
right?
And for me, yesterday it was just peace of mind, and it's like no matter what happens with the elections, I'm still going to wake up today.
Yep.
I'm still going to be the person I am.
The sun will come up tomorrow.
Yeah, and it's like there's a song about that.
Yeah, I know.
And so
you should, you should write a song called that.
So yeah, I mean, it's
when I'm stuck with a day that's gray.
Welcome back
and
to the
lonely.
podcast.
Yeah, here we
I
go.
just stick out my chin and grin and say.
If we could do that with an Elvis tone, I mean, because
and say.
One last question from me. What would you say to someone who is going through the motions?
no.
Yeah, like you said you did for so many years. Just coming to church, going through the motions, probably not getting anything out of it, just checking the box, like you said. What would you say to them?
Yeah, looking back, going through the motions, I was doing the things that I wanted to, and I could say that I was a believer. I could say that I believe in Jesus Christ, and but then like getting plugged back in, I can say it, but I can believe it, and one of the big things, I mean, especially with Alpha, Nathan came in and was talking about, how all the ways that the Bible has been tried to been disproven, or and the math that it goes into for Jesus to fulfill all the prophecies that he's ever done, and it's like all of those things. There's no way that the Bible is not true, and so then in talking with Kirk and Julie and others, it's like, okay, so if all these things point to the Bible being completely 100% true, then everything else in the Bible is true, and so that means Jesus is true. That means God is true. That means Adam and Eve is true. That means that Jesus did walk on water. He did die, and he took our sins with us. And getting to fully say, I'm a believer and I believe, I think there's so much strength and confidence, and then again, it kind of comes is that rested assurance of, I am worthy, I am deserving, but on the same hand, I'm not worthy and I'm not deserving, I think, once you get done playing church, or once you get done going through the motions and riding the fence and taking that leap of, all right, let's get after this. Like, that's a real thing.
Let's have a living faith.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's that belief plus the commitment to action, right? Actually reading your Bible, actually reaching out for prayer.
Yeah.
Yep.
And just for the record, I appreciate skepticism. I really do. I know everybody's like, well, you want to push. It's like, you know what? No, because I believe that the more you look, the more you research, the more you find.
Yep.
The more you ask, the more the seek, the more you knock, the more it's given. And so I can appreciate a person who's got kind of I always give Aaron grief, and I say, when way first began, you sat in the corner with your cop skepticism.
Yeah.
Almost like, I dare you to prove to me that this is real. And what's cool is that once you do, then it's like, okay, Katie, bar the door. Okay, it's true. It's real. I'm not gonna go through the motions just because. I'm gonna take time. I'm gonna research this. I'm gonna investigate. That's why Alpha is such a great thing for that. And as you find out that there's evidence to this. It's eventually you gotta. The final stage is always faith, but it's not blind faith. It's really informed faith.
Yeah.
And but the evidence is there. You just got to start looking for a reason to believe instead of looking for a reason to fuel your skepticism.
Yeah, and I knew Aaron when he was starting that transition and coming to church, and and when he did his Alpha talk, I had to pull him aside and apologize, because when I first got there to the sheriff's office, we would hang out, we would drink and party, and then all of a sudden Aaron and Trisha were gone. It's like, oh, where are they at? And they're like, well, he's playing church. And and it's like, so we're here we are in the background. It's like, well, we're just going to wait for this phase to fizzle out, and he'll be back, and then at some point it's like, oh no, this is like a real thing, and then it became, I know that he's on fire. I know how that feels, and then there's that shame and jealousy of it. But then you have that pride sticking in your, you got to eat a bunch of crow to say, I'm sorry, God.
Yeah.
And so then, yeah, I mean, it's nice to have to see that change in somebody, and then to be able to come back and be like, no, I want that.
Yeah.
And it's been fun to get back in and have it. So
Yeah, man.
Well, I just want to go on record of saying, I know we're probably getting more questions. We're getting to the end. I want to say thank you.
Yep.
Thank you for coming on here and
Being vulnerable.
being vulnerable. And I just want to say, to people that will watch this, I just want to say, we do love veterans here. I wouldn't say we understand all the situations you've been in, but we do have hearts for what you've been through.
And we have people that that have been through similar things, like Josh and Kirk and
I mean,
others.
you know, and it's important that you hear what Josh had to say, that, you know, you can find freedom. I think that's the part that, so if you're in that place, or if you have a loved one, if you're watching this and you have a loved one that's in a hard place, you know, show them this, and then, you know, give us a call, or, you know, reach out, whatever it is, and we'll definitely do what we can. You know, we'll go wherever. At a minimum, we'll pray for you, and we'll bring you in. We'll pray for you, and we'll. But you know, just know that you're valued, and to us, you're very important. So hear that.
Yeah.
Yeah. You want to end in prayer?
Yeah, I'll end in prayer. Just two more things. One, you were talking earlier. You've never watched this podcast before.
Never have.
But
No.
you did just admit that you listen to a lot of books online.
Which are basically podcasts.
Yeah. So now,
Yeah.
so now you can check us out. You get a lot of windshield time, so
I do.
You can check us out.
Yeah.
And you got a backlog of like 250 podcasts.
Where do I start? Yeah, I mean, I the thing about the books that I've found, though, part of it is I have, you know, I've been trying to do a lot of PTSD and anxiety and you know, life issue books, and you know,
does it help?
I think it does help, but in more ways than not, it helped me get help.
Yeah.
And you know, watching or listening and understanding other guys' stories, and watching them break it down, their barrier, and it's like, no, I mean, I can do that.
Yeah.
And but then it like I said, you know, it's helped me get help and be okay with it, because you know, it is a real thing. And you know, I used to think, you know, PTSD was a hoax, and you know, it's just, you know, you're soft, you don't know how to deal with your problems, and you know, the more that you bury those feelings down, the worse it gets. And you know, I don't enjoy I don't share like all my stories, especially with you know, either non-veterans or even veterans that weren't overseas. But the more you can talk about it, the more open you can be, and the more uplifting, and you know, kind of like I said, taking off that mask. So
Find some healing.
yeah.
Kind of puts it in the light, takes it out, you know, shine a little light on it, kind of helps kind of, I don't know what they say, the light always kind of makes things seem a little less big when you bring it into the light. If it's in the darkness, it seems to get bigger. So,
Last thing I wanted to add, have you ever read or listened to the book Fearless? Putting a plug in for a book here. Ryan Kurowski just read it. It's about a Navy SEAL, went through Teen Challenge. And
No.
then, like, one of the quotes that stuck out to me in that was, the guy's name was Adam Brown. He was a SEAL over that and did multiple deployments. But he was reading his Bible, and somebody in his on his team looked at him and said, "How can you believe in that stuff when we're over here doing what we're doing?" And he said, "I don't know how you can't believe in this with what we're doing over here."
Yeah.
And so,
shout out too to the Gideon ministry. You mentioned the Bibles that they give you in basic training.
Yeah.
They've been doing, I don't know how long they've been doing that, but that, you know, nothing quite like being in a situation like that where you start reading. I mean, I remember reading my Gideon Bible too in boot camp. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, those foxhole prayers, you know, there's a lot of guys have come to Jesus based off of what they've done, you know, getting out of that battle, or you know, but then, you know, it's you know,
I know we've got a few Gideons in our church congregation. And it's a good ministry.
Yeah, there's well, we go back to Nathan's Alpha Talk, and it, you know, you may be wrong, but what happens if you're right?
Yeah.
Or what happens if you're wrong on the other side?
Right.
And you know, what are you missing out? And it's like, no, that's absolutely true. It's like, you know, there's a lot more to this whole thing than you want to give credit.
Amen.
There's nothing like a little stress in your life being in danger that all of a sudden you just start praying.
Yeah.
I remember I was on a barricaded subject in Grinnell, and I was not following God at all at this time, and I was kind of in a overwatch position with a long gun, and I thought the team had made entry. Grinnell had an entry team at the time because I heard a bang go off. Well, the guy had fired a shotgun round out the house, and all of a sudden it starts coming across the radio. They're doing, checks on everybody. And in that moment, two things happened. One, I realized my life's in danger, and I started praying. And two, I'm like, I need to find some cover.
Yeah.
I'm in a bad spot. So I moved. But, afterwards we went and looked, and, yeah, he had fired that round right in my direction. But, yeah, under stress, there's nothing that drives a prayer faster than that. So, anyway, thanks for being on, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Appreciate your vulnerability and your openness and honesty. And, I hope for the podcast is that someone listens and is inspired or intrigued to get help or to even come be a part of community.
Yeah, for sure.
And find some healing. And so, would it be all right if I prayed for you at the end of the podcast?
Yeah.
All right, let's do it. Father God, I just thank you. Thank you for this time and this space that you gave us this morning, Lord, where we got to hear Josh's testimony, Lord, the testimony that you've given him. Lord, I thank you. I thank you for everything that he's been through, even the hard stuff, Lord, because in it, he looks back and he sees that you were there. Lord, he looks back and he knows that he can't find healing by himself on his own, Lord. And so you've brought him to this place of getting plugged into church community. You've brought him to this place of getting help, Lord, and giving him healing. And so, Lord, I thank you for all the ways that you're just moving in his heart, especially in the last several months, Lord, and the fire that you've just ignited in his heart, Lord, to know you on a deeper, more intimate level, Lord, and to know others as well. And so, Lord, I just pray for continued healing for him. Thank you for all the resources, the VA and the doctors and the care that give all of our veterans care, Lord, and help them find healing. So, Lord, I just pray that you continue to use them. Lord, I pray for this podcast, again, to just reach people where they're at and people that have emotional walls and guards up and have a face on, as Josh talked about, Lord. Just let them know that there's others out here, Lord, that love them and care for them and want them to experience the same freedom that they found in you, Jesus. And so, Holy Spirit, continue to move, continue to work in the hearts of our veterans, our first responders that are out there on the front lines, Lord, experiencing things that normal civilians don't. And quite honestly, we don't want them to have to experience it. And so be with them, help them, guard them, give them the tools and the resources to continue to do their job, but also not be burdened by the trauma that comes along with it, Lord. Help them find the resources to find healing. And Lord, I pray for just family support as well. Wives and kids and parents to be able to support those that are serving, Lord, and that they may stay connected with one another. And that you will be in the midst of all. You're the third cord, the third strand, and it's not easily broken in a marriage, Lord. So, Lord, just offer Josh up to you. Use him